Hi, everybody. Hello, welcome in. We're just, waiting for a few people to join, so we'll just give it a minute or two while we let everyone in. While we're waiting, feel free to say hi in the chat, maybe introduce yourself, and if you'd like to say where you're joining us from today, or maybe where in the world you are, and if it is not raining, be great to know kind of where you're all joining from. Hi, Susie. Great. Okay, I think, whilst we're still kind of letting people in, I'll start to just kind of introduce the session today and let you all know what we've got planned for the next hour or so. So it's great to see so many faces on the call and some familiar names. Some of you will know this is the second in a series that we've just started running at BLab UK, focused on unpacking each impact area within the B Impact assessment. And today is all about the environment section. So we know this is a really chunky section of the assessment, and it can often be quite daunting, especially at the beginning when you're just kind of getting started. And it's a wide-ranging section that covers lots of different topics. So we really wanted to provide a space to just kind of break it down and provide some useful tips for you to think about when you're going through the assessment, and just kind of beyond once you're in the process, but you might be looking to make continual improvements. So all of you on the call today will have submitted your assessment. Some of you will be in the evaluation queue, and during this time you can still make changes and amendments. So hopefully there'll be some useful tips in here for you today whilst you're in that stage. And those of you who might be in different parts of the verification process, your assessment might be locked, but hopefully it will still be useful to focus on areas for kind of longer term improvements and thinking about that continuous improvement and your impact going forward. So we're going to break down this hour into two main parts. We've got Amy Borbo, who is a BIA consultant, and she will take us through kind of what the environment section covers and some quick wins. And this will really be focused on kind of the operational parts of the assessment, so things that every business can think about, and that will hopefully be applicable to lots of people, no matter what industry or size of business you're from. And then we also want to introduce you to one of our B Corps, so Seacourt Printing Company, who have scored exceptionally highly in the environment section of the BIA, are here with us today. And we're joined by Jake Backus, who's the head of sustainability at Seacourt. And he is going to take us through kind of all of the really interesting things that Seacourt has implemented and have earned credit for in the environment section of the BIA. And so Daisy, one of our evaluation analysts, will be having kind of Q&A style conversation with Jake. And then we'll also have lots of time at the end for a bit of a Q&A. So any questions that you might have on the environment section of the BIA, that will be a good opportunity to get those answered. So without further ado, I'll hand right over to Amy. Oh, I've missed out even a few housekeeping points. So hopefully you'll have seen we're recording the session, and we'll share the recording and the slides afterwards. If you could just keep yourself on mute during the presentations, we will take any questions that you have in the chat or during the Q&A at the end. Over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Nicole, and hi everyone. As Nicole said, I'm Amy, and some of you may have spoken to me already. I do support BLab 1 day a week, and then the rest of the time I'm a B Corp consultant, as Nicole said. So happy to dig into the environment and the specific questions within it, what type of topics it covers, certain things for you to consider as you're in the queue and checking over that you're as prepared as possible and potentially even implementing improvements while you're waiting. So we can just dive right in. One of the first things for us to consider is who are the right people to speak to for gathering the information that you need to answer the environment section. So if we just move on to the next slide, we've now throughout this kind of presentation, as we go through things, these are kind of high level suggestions and advice based on questions that you might see. Obviously, as you probably know, the assessment is tailored to companies based on their size and sector. So depending on exactly that, your size and sector and what your product or service is, some of these things are going to be more or less relevant to you. So just bearing in mind that some of these suggestions, they might not be relevant for you, and that's okay. Pick up the things that are and forget about the things that aren't. But some of the key players that you might want to engage are whoever it is that kind of manages and understands your facilities, whether that be your offices or if you have other facilities that you manage and run. Also, you might want to consider engaging with your employees on this. If you all work from home, you could also, it might be not one person that looks after a facility, or engaging the wider team on how they each look after their own homes and the actions they take. Supply chain and operations. So if you have, there's a little bit about purchasing, even if you are kind of a service related company, but usually this is more for companies who have a product and just wanting to understand detail about how far those products have traveled, or for example, the MPD team, new product development, understanding what ingredients and materials go into products that are being designed and made, or the quality and technical team to understand kind of elements of chemical control and what levels of certain ingredients exist within your product, etc. So some or all of these might be relevant to you. Now we're going to dive into the subsections or impact areas of the environment section. So there's 4, and it starts off with this environmental management section, which really looks at a kind of overview of what policies and practices you have in place around the environment, and understands, for example, at a high level, what have you done to measure, understand, set goals, etc., around your environmental impact. So, for example, do you have an environmental management system? Have you done a full kind of footprint analysis to understand what your environmental impact as a company is? What specific policies do you have in place around environmental consideration, etc.? So that's the kind of umbrella piece that thinks about how do you look at environment overall. And then in the next sections, we move into kind of more specifics. So if we can go to the next one, you're perfect. So air and climate looks at kind of greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage. And that's both within your facilities, and for companies on a larger track, it might be for your supply chain as well. So understanding in one level, it'll ask you, what do you measure and monitor and understand of these things for your own facilities, your own operations? And then other questions might specifically call out, do you engage with your supply chain or value chain to understand their energy or greenhouse gas footprint, etc. There's also things in there around kind of local sourcing and how you travel to work, things like that. So anything that kind of has an impact on air emissions. Then in water, it's a pretty straightforward section. Same thing, really. It's about understanding your own water usage and that of your supply chain. Also, if you have anything kind of any innovative practices, like maybe in your buildings, if you collect rainwater, and we'd all be doing well today, or you know, or grey water, etc. And then finally, land and life, which looks at some of the kind of more solid impacts, so waste, biodiversity, chemical management, etc. And again, internally in your own facilities and in your supply chain, and also looks at some of the, again, if you have a product, it also looks at some of the specific details of your products. For example, what percentage of your products have environmentally certified ingredients in them, etc. Have you source reduced your products? So next, we're going to have a look at the impact business models that exist within environment. And I won't go too much into detail because there's 6 different available ones. And obviously, only a portion of you are going to have an impact business model that's relevant to you. But just a couple of things to call out here. First of all, something like, you just want to remember that the scope for an impact business model is something that is a core part of what you do, how you earn your revenue, and how you run your business. So for example, renewable or cleaner burning energy wouldn't be if you use renewable energy in your offices. It would be, for example, are you an organization that provides renewable energy as your service? So like squeaky or bulb and that kind of thing. Next thing I wanted to call out was environmentally innovative process. So this is an impact business model that we see people opting into quite a bit, companies who have like a product that they make or sell. And quite often we see people opting into this environmentally innovative wholesale or manufacturing process impact business model because they feel that there's something specifically innovative and environmentally friendly about the product that they create. And just to call out here, this is specifically about the process itself rather than the ingredients or what the thing is that you're making. So you could be creating a product that has no kind of environmental value one way or the other, but you're doing it in a really innovative way where you've significantly reduced the environmental impact of the production process. That's what we're trying to get at here. So it's about the production process or the wholesale process rather than whatever the specific thing is that you're making or selling. Also, there's some very kind of specific requirements. So just make sure that you're paying close attention to the questions that you answer, the gating questions at the beginning of that section, so that you're only answering the things that are accurate. Make sure you've answered every question. And then hopefully if you answer everything accurately, you'll be seeing it for the right reasons and not because you've accidentally ended up in that area, which is really easy to do by accident. And then just finally to call out, if you might be earning an impact business model and environment and not realize it. So if you create or sell a product, if that product has organic ingredients, or if it has FSC ingredients, and this is not including packaging, so only the input materials into the product that get sold itself, then, and a couple of other certifications, but those are the core ones that you would get recognized. Or if your product contains recycled materials, then you can capture that within an impact business model. So, and you get points according to the percentage of your cost of goods or your revenue sold that are made up of those certified ingredients or products. So just something to bear in mind, if any of that kind of raises a flag for you that you have input materials like that, I can put in the chat which thing relates to which impact business model. Okay, we'll move on from that. Thank you very much. So going into low-hanging fruit, some opportunities for improvement. Like Nicole said, you're all in the review process, but you can still be making updates while you're waiting. So you can use this definitely as a time to increase your score as much as possible before you go into the actual review stage. So again, some of these things may not be present in your BIA, or of course you may be already earning these points, but a few things to flag up. So you can generally anywhere in the assessment that you see a reference to a policy or something in writing, that's an opportunity to it's quite a quick win, because as long as you, as long as it's something that you agree with and something that you'd like to do as a business, you can kind of put that into writing, embed it in the business by saving it wherever your other policies are kept, emailing your team or telling them verbally, this policy exists, here's what it's meant to achieve, here's what it means for you, and then you can capture that. So for example, an environmentally preferable purchasing policy, where you commit to considering the environmental impact of products before you buy them, and where possible, going with the most environmentally friendly version of something. Next one is within the question called environmental management systems. It asks if you have a kind of policy statement regarding your commitment to the environment. It's a really good process to go through to think about what is our commitment to the environment, what do we want to be stating, and then putting that into writing to provide a bit of guidance to the team. Next one is around monitoring and recording energy usage. So a quick one here. Obviously, the ideal scenario is that you run your own office and you have a meter that you can refer to, and it's super simple to monitor your energy usage. That's obviously not always the case. So I would recommend liaising with your landlord if you can, to ask them if they can share information on their energy usage, or even a per head energy usage, etc., so that you can kind of track that way. Also, in this time when we're all working from home a lot, you can do surveys to your team to find out what energy providers they're using, how often they work from home, etc., to kind of calculate your overall energy usage. Next one. If possible, switch to a low impact renewable energy provider. There's a few in the B Corp community, and obviously it's way better for the environment. It's often cheaper as well, so it's usually a win-win. Next one is around monitoring and recording your greenhouse gas emissions. So there's plenty of tools out there that can help you to do this. I'm sure there's kind of online calculators if you want to do it kind of manually, or there's also partners that you can use like Carbon Analytics or other tools out there that can help you to make it an easy process. It doesn't have to be daunting. It sounds a bit scary. How do I ever calculate that? But there's people out there that can help you with that. And it's good to get an understanding, even if you're a service provider and you don't have that many greenhouse gas emissions, it's still good to get an understanding. And then once you know that, you can choose to offset the emissions if you want. Again, there's companies in the B Corp community who you can purchase greenhouse gas offsets through, and who, you know, it's always important, whether that's somebody that's B Corp certified or not, to use a provider that is providing high standard offsets that meet the requirements of offsets, and not some of the kind of like dodgy ones that exist out there. So do your homework and try and responsibly source those offsets if that's what you choose to do. Also, for the question, the assessment asks about your scope 1 and 2 offsets. So for most companies, those are quite low unless you manufacture a lot of products. And so it's usually pretty reasonable to offset your emissions if you want to. Thanks. Monitoring and recording your water usage, same story as energy usage. If you don't have easy to access meters yourselves, reach out to your landlords, etc. excuse me, to try and get information. And with things like monitoring and recording energy usage, water usage, it can sound quite formal, but actually with all of these things, it can just be something that's really easy, straightforward. You track it in an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be snazzy. It can just be something really practical like that. And then finally, and I'll stop talking after that, just some of the tricky concepts that we see in the environmental section that we hear a lot of questions about, but sometimes catch people up. So the first thing is understanding the kind of scope of the question. How much of the business should I or shouldn't I be including in this? So for example, when it asks about your energy usage, you might be concerned that you know about your energy usage, but you don't know that of your suppliers or your supply chain. The question If it wants to find out about your supply chain or your value chain, it will specifically call it out in the title and or description of the question. If it doesn't, then, and it just says, what are your greenhouse gas emissions? What is your energy usage? It's just asking about your own facilities and anything that's kind of within your control. So whether that be your office space or kind of doing a survey to your employees, it's only about the things that are within your control as an organization. And then kind of from there, something that is quite frustrating is that oftentimes people say we would like to do more on the environmental point of view, but we're at the mercy of our landlords, and the space that we're in doesn't do this, or it's not our choice. As much as possible, reach out to your landlords and try and find out the information. So B Lab's offices are in X and Y, which is a certified B Corp co-working space. They're super environmentally friendly, and they're very open and warm, and will share with you information about their energy providers, etc. That's like a best case scenario. Less ideal scenario is that you start the conversation and the landlord will engage with you and hopefully want to increase their performance. Worst case scenario, unfortunately, you might just have to miss the point or think about moving to a different office space. But try a few different things first before you just assume that you can't get the points, because sometimes you can. And then finally, just sometimes people are concerned about things not being relevant to them. So for example, a service-based company thinking, how do we measure our greenhouse gas emissions? We don't do anything except for maybe like heat our office, and that's it. And that's absolutely fine. That's relevant. It's all kind of relative to your operations. So the questions, remember, are tailored to suit your size and sector. They're weighted accordingly to that. And we all have an environmental footprint. We all do something, even if it's only boiling the kettle or putting the heating on. So it's not expecting you to have the same footprint as a massive organization, but it is kind of still worth engaging with that information and us all having an understanding of our own footprints or that of our company. So it's in there because it's relevant. And that's it. Thank you. Hope that's been useful. I'm happy to answer questions at the end or in the chat.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. I think there's a few questions going on in the chat, which is great. And I think we'll be able to come back to some of those in the Q&A at the end. So in the meantime, I'll hand over to Daisy and Jake to talk a bit more about some of the things that Seacourt have been implementing in the environment section.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, Jake.
Hey, check.
Thank you so much.
Sound is on.
Thank you for joining us today to share some of your insights from Seacourt. We're really excited to hear about it. Just before we get going with the Q&A, I just wanted to highlight for the audience some context around Seacourt. So Seacourt are a printing company, and we're really proud and pleased to say that you've been awarded the B Corp Best for the World for the Environment section in 2021. And this means that Seacourt is in the top 5% of B Corps in the 10 to 49 employee category for the environment section. So definitely some great credentials to be starting this conversation with. So firstly, we're going to jump into a question about monitoring and measuring impacts. So Jake, could you just give us some context about how you go about doing this at Seacourt, please?
Sure. First of all, we've been on a bit of a journey. So we have had ISO 14001 since the mid-1990s, and we also applied for EMAS in 1999. So for over 20 years, we've got in the regular habit of collecting data. The biggest source of that data is our suppliers and our supply chain, which we then make into an electronic format, and we know where we've put it. So the main thing is to keep a good process for collecting the data and managing that data. We put in smart meters more recently for managing energy, but really it's supplier engagement, which is the key thing. Also, quarterly, we have a consultant. I think his main speciality is ISO standards, but he comes once a quarter to look at all of our systems, to go through them, to audit our data, and help us make sure we put everything in the right place. So we do have some help getting hold of all of that.
Sure, that's some really great context. So as a small business, you still, you find this a manageable task, because sometimes that's the question that we have from small businesses, where do we start with all this environmental data collection?
Well, you obviously need a bit of a framework. The key framework is perhaps your carbon footprint, but also that it can be a great framework, ISO 14001. It's quite a rigorous, like B Corp, it's a big old rigorous process. I've had to do it for another company as well. It can be a bit of a pain, but it also means you have to get a grip of all your data.
Absolutely.
We carbon footprint our entire supply chain. Most of the environmental impacts are in our supply chain. So we've really included all of our suppliers, but even going to our suppliers, some of our own suppliers got their carbon emissions wrong by a factor of 10. Therefore, I've had to work out for them what their carbon footprint is and actually tell them and help them as well. So we'll come on later on. Actually working with and helping your suppliers and your clients is useful, but also a good source of data.
And we were just wondering about the third-party verification of the environmental data that you have, conducted, and what do you find is the main benefit of having this third-party verification of the data?
Well, first of all, we do our own carbon footprint because I'm an environmental consultant for the other half of my job. But it was really important. One of our a prospective client who was promising a lot of business wanted to see that it was audited. So that was our original nudge to go and get it audited. But also it turned out that I'd missed a few. I'd done it a really good job. They were very pleased, but I hadn't done the emissions of the emissions, or the emissions of the emissions of the emissions. Like, goodness me, you've got to work out what was the footprint of getting the petrol to the petrol station before you bought it. Not sure why it's not already included and all that. So anyway, so I learned something, but actually increasingly, as more companies set targets to become net carbon zero or etc., a lot of people are doing it themselves. You do need an audit to avoid greenwash. So I think this whole subject of greenwash is growing very fast. And not only can you get some validation, but there are places where it can be quite expensive. So it costs us quite a lot of money to get a third-party audit. But increasingly, some people who will do your offsetting will check your data for you, etc., etc. So, it can potentially be free.
Okay, great, thank you. And someone in the chat's just asked who audits this. So I suppose it's a environmental consultant, but how would you go about, sourcing a consultancy to do that for you?
So, well, one, I am a consultancy, but also I live in Oxford. It's a pretty sustainable place. So I know I've got a good network. So I went to a really famous, very large agency, and then basically begged mates rates because, come on, please, we're only a little small business, we can't afford to. So it's not too hard to go and look up on the internet and try to find somebody who is doing these audits and assurances, and they will follow the it gets really, really techie at times, but they will follow the global carbon protocol, all that kind of stuff. So
sure.
to make sure you've done it right. And increasingly, I've actually given a lot of advice to these startups and these software companies that do, and I said, you really got to help SMEs. The big companies can go and afford an expensive consultant, like the Carbon Trust wanted to charge £25,000 to do a carbon footprint. Well, that's way too much for for an SME. And even like £15,000 to do the scope 3, which obviously is the tricky bit. But there will be online tools to make it much, much easier. So it's coming, maybe not in time for us all, but actually it's common sense. It's not too difficult. And the key source of data is your UK government emissions factors for each year. Don't forget, you have to choose 2021 or 2020, and then if you're choosing 2019 as a comparison, you have to go and get different emissions factor, but the government publishes those emission factors for you to use, and then we've actually got it all set up in Excel, and then we get it checked and audited.
Great, thank you, Jake, that's fantastic. So just before we move on to the next question, the next section will focus on impact business models, which Amy already briefly touched on. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background context. So just to mention again, impact business models are heavily weighted sections of the assessment designed to award credit for companies that create a specific positive benefit, and it's like a really intentional benefit that they want their company to have this certain outcome. And this can be related to either processes, as Amy mentioned with the environmentally innovative wholesale process, which we'll go on to talk about next, or it can be product related, so a component of your product which has a really high environmental credential. So Seacourt has been awarded both a process and 2 product related impact business models, and this is a rare achievement. So this is why we really want to unpack this with Jake in the next section. So sorry, Jake, just to provide some more context. So firstly, we're going to focus on the process related innovations that Seacourt has focused on. So Jake, what is the main initiative that you've implemented to manage the environmental impact of the business, please?
Well, first of all, to give context, because not all of you are going to be printers, but the context is the printing industry, which I think is the 5th largest industry in the UK, or certainly was, is in the same environmental classification as the oil industry and the nuclear industry. It's very polluting, you know, and damaging for the environment. So about 25 years ago, Seacourt, just a small small SME family-run business, thought there has to be a better way. And one of the key elements is how you print. It uses a lot of water. And then it turns out water isn't wet enough. So a lot of printers have to add these chemicals, isopropyl alcohol, which are highly volatile organic chemicals, to make the water wetter. And then all of that gets discharged to the environment. You know, once it's been used, it creates an unhealthy environment for people working there, these high VOCs. So Seacourt actually invented the waterless printing process. So they got some sort of standard equipment. It took about 2 years to create the innovation. The industry didn't want to know, wasn't particularly helpful. And I'm quite surprised that they managed to. It wasn't cheap. I have to say, Seacourt spent a lot of money on this, but then we had to work with our ink suppliers to actually create a new type of ink. And we had to also innovate the type of ink to go with our printer, and then actually makes a higher quality print as well as a side benefit, because you get less bleed, it's less, you know, wet and watery, but there's now no water discharge to the environment and 98% reduction in, you know, these high VOC chemicals. So that was really a key thing that we innovated. You know, and since then, and not in fact included in our application, we do large format printing. So these huge banners like you see for National Trust, and who's one of our clients, they're made of PVC. So PVC is just about the worst plastic you can use. It's a huge contaminant in the recycling system. Normally, like PVC plastic is hard to identify what it is. So we make it out of polypropylene, and then we got this, you know, how we all talk about getting washing machines back and servicing them and sending them back and buying the service of a car or a washing machine. So actually we now make it out of polypropylene, so it is itself recyclable at end of life. If our client can't recycle them, we will take them back and recycle them on behalf of our clients, so that we're thinking about the full life cycle as well. And then also we make sure that we use FSC certified paper, and that's just a question. There are certain things you can have, like having a really strong supplier code of conduct. Not everyone likes the word supplier code of conduct, so it could be sustainable supplier guidelines, but you can really look into what you're buying and then go look for the most sustainable options possible. What was the other thing we innovated in? But mainly is to make sure that we buy categorically the most sustainable thing we possibly can. It's really part of our positioning to be the most sustainable printer in the UK, bar none. And so we're constantly looking to maintain and keep that status.
Fantastic. That's just so many amazing examples there, Jake. And I just wanted to reiterate the amazing innovation that you did at Seacourt to create the waterless printing process is just a perfect example of where the environmentally innovative manufacturing process impact business model would be awarded during the B Corp review process, because it's really taking a fundamental step in the manufacturing process, completely redesigning it and creating amazing savings compared to either past practice within the business or industry competitors. And this goes back to what Amy was saying, where companies unfortunately often mistakenly opt into this process. But it just really displays, hopefully, the level of innovation that's required to be awarded with that impact business model. And then you mentioned there about the FSC paper that you use as an input material, and this links really nicely to the next slide, which focuses on impact business models. On we've covered the process side with the innovation, but on the product side, where Seacourt's been awarded the land and wildlife conservation impact business model for their use of FSC certified input materials. And the other product related impact business model Seacourt's been awarded is the resource conservation impact business model, and for a smaller percentage of revenue, but for the recycled paper input materials that Seacourt uses. So, Jake, I don't know did you want to elaborate any more about the input materials?
Yeah, a lot of people think, oh, you're using paper, it's about chopping down trees. Well, that's true, but at the same time, it's a renewable material. We need to sort of ultimately substitute worse products, and then planting trees is important. It does get complicated around the subject of trees, and there's all sorts of things around deforestation. So you genuinely need to spend a lot of time understanding your supply chain. Something I learned a long time ago is go and walk your supply chain for yourself and go and see what happens to your waste. Talk to your waste contractor, what happens with all of your suppliers. And so at the bottom left, you can see here's us having a meeting in France with our paper supplier and the directors to tell them that sustainability is super important for us, and to see what more they can do. But obviously, you know, I think one of the biggest problems in the whole subject of sustainability is communication, because we know about climate change, we've got the resources, so why are we not doing it? So it's a failure to engage people. So I thought also, you know, it's about saying this product is made from recyclable materials and is made and can itself be recycled at end of life. Because otherwise, what's the point of, you know, what's the point of recycling? You never see it come back. That I felt that the engagement side of having something made from recycled paper and recycled materials is so important, because then when you print, how can you have a sustainability report that wasn't printed sustainably? In fact, you know what, I don't trust you and anything you said in that report if you didn't bother to go and look and how you could print that as sustainably as possible. But ultimately, we want to get to a stage where we can say the printing of these materials makes a net positive contribution to society and the environment. Right now, we're saying net positive on climate change and society, and we'll come back to what's next for us. But actually, so there's a lot of innovation in your supply chain, and some suppliers says, well, we never thought you wanted, you know, nobody ever asked for this. That actually your supplier guidelines is one of the most important actions you can take. The UK government has one. If you want to supply the UK government, you better have a net carbon zero strategy as well. And so I feel that because we have lots of suppliers often, that's a really important initiative. So yeah, so it's just about finding out what is the most important thing you can do, and then go and choose. We actually did an assessment of all of the paper mills across Europe. I looked at the WWF rating for it. We looked at their carbon impact, their environmental impact, and then also those that integrated with forestry, about do they have biodiversity management within their forests, and they're just not some monoculture, which is another issue, industrial agriculture and monoculture. And then we just chose categorically the most sustainable, without worrying too much about price.
So really being careful about that supplier selection process.
It is, because the whole we spent a lot of money on the innovation. We spend a lot of time thinking about our positioning, and it is saving us. You know, the printing industry is going backwards, losing a lot of jobs. Companies are closing down. People are opting not to print. But we do need models of what, you know, sustainable development looks like and how we can be better. And this has really supported our competitive positioning. Despite, so you see, costs are not seen as costs, they're seen as investments for the future, and about having resilient supply chains as well.
Okay, so just to finish off on the impact business model sections, I just wanted to mention a couple of common pitfalls, which thankfully Seacourt haven't fallen into, but just to raise the awareness of the audience. So you've heard Seacourt have been awarded a number of different impact business models, and this is because they've got multiple different positive environmental impacts related to different product lines. So you've got the FSC related product line, the recycled content related product line, which are separate, and that's why they're awarded separate credit. And the other thing to mention is that the paper products that Seacourt are making, that is their key product that they're selling is paper products. And a common pitfall we see is that companies try to opt in or accidentally opt into the FSC related land and wildlife impact business model or the resource conservation impact business model because they use either FSC or recycled content packaging. And unfortunately, these business models are not currently set up in a way for us to give that credit at this time for packaging. So we just wanted to make that really clear that these are about the key products that the business is selling. So we'll just move on to the next slide. And I think this is our final question for Jake today. So Jake, we just wanted to end on finding out what tips do you have for others working through the BIA and what's next for Seacourt? You've already told us about some of your ongoing innovations, but that would be great to hear.
Well, I think companies should question, what is your right to exist? What are you doing that's actually good for society and the environment? It's no longer enough for shareholders to get wealthy and leave the contamination, the pollution, the impacts on society for the commons and the rest of society to pick up. So obviously it takes a while. So that I think the main initiative is how can we get to a place which is restorative and regenerative, and ultimately those companies to say, we're not going to do any harm, we're going to get to carbon neutral. Like, why? Because if it's a lot of harm here and a lot of good here, why are you going just smack in the middle? It's only one extra step to be net positive. And actually, this whole subject of sustainability and climate change is doom and gloom. We're all too tired and bored of it, that we need messages of being net positive. And all of the companies that are committed to stop deforestation in their supply chain between 2010 and 2020, the whole Consumer Goods Forum, 430 companies, none of them achieved it. Because it's not enough to do a little less harm. We now need to be restorative and regenerative. So our next step is to try to work out how we can be net positive for the environment. And now that starts to be very complex and complicated. So we're looking at the Kate Raworth's donut economics model, then a bit nervous about releasing it for businesses. So we might have to get a consultant to work out one specifically just for us. And that would be very complex. So I might have to get some students at Oxford University to help me work that out. So tips and tricks, some suggestions. So Coca-Cola, I used to work for Coca-Cola for 16 years. Years ago, after having an issue with water in India, then did a forecast out to 2030 and 2050 water availability for all 900 factories around the world. So that concept, and then it finds out, 40% of all of our factories are an area of water scarcity. But looking into the future, so many things become much clearer. And then with that clarity, you can start to take those actions now. So even ASDA did an assessment of its fresh produce supply chain years and years ago and found out that globally 95% of its global fresh produce supply chain was at risk of climate change. So you now need to build, there's an opportunity to build a much more resilient supply chain, and future things. So future cast is a really useful subject, because otherwise it's, nothing's going to happen tomorrow, nothing really, the ice didn't melt tomorrow and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is like being a leader, which is again going back to that bit about, I can't remember now, about being positive, because climate change is a dead cert. It's happening. The government set a target to be carbon neutral by 2050, 78% reduction by 2030. So you either want to be ahead of that curve or behind it. If you're behind that curve, you are a drag on the rest of society. So it's happening anyway. You might as well be ahead of the curve and create some trust and leadership agenda with your, your consumers, shoppers, customers, and employees. The next thing is a lot of people see B Corp about just getting past 80 points. Why? You know, just scraping through so you can have the badge of B Corp. Actually, the really exciting thing about B Corp is it is a framework for what a better business looks like. So you don't almost, you know, don't apologize for chasing the points as a way to sort of game, you know, not gamify it, but to make it more interesting. Is I push Seacourt, I push all of my clients to be the very best that they can be, and just ask, can we do this? We don't have this, let's do it, you know. And how difficult is it? So actually, this is why I love working with SMEs, because you can talk to the head of the commercial section or the CEO or whatever, because we can get decisions made much more quickly than you ever could with some huge business. So actually use the B Corp framework as what a better business looks like, and then go for everything you possibly can. Don't ask the question, are we already doing this? We're not doing that now. Okay, you're not doing that now, but you could. So then read the question carefully. Does it say, have you done this in the last 12 months? So a lot of them say that. Oh, no, we haven't. Fair enough, we haven't done that. But they've done a lot of the questions say, do you do this? Quickly, yep, we do that. So suddenly you can decide, yep, we do that. It's in there. And you've given evidence for the fact that that's now integrated into your processes. So go for the absolute best score you possibly can, because ultimately, as more companies become B Corp and people are aware of what B Corp means, you know, it's a badge of honor to get a better score, you know. And then my other bit of advice is government listens disproportionately to business. We've all heard about how businesses lobby government. That actually left out of all of this advice of what businesses should do, often they forget about the role of advocacy of business. Businesses need to stand up and give a mandate to government to be more rigorous around sustainability. In fact, in COP15 in Copenhagen, it was the businesses saying, let's do this, we're ready for this, the leading businesses. Because otherwise the government, no, we don't want to do this because it's bad for business. And actually the business is saying, no, we're ready, let's do it. Like, hang on. So push forwards, make your best. And so brands like, or companies like Patagonia, they stand up for something and they say what they believe in. That's what brands used to be really like. Coca-Cola used to say, I like to teach the world to sing and buy the world at home. And it had a leadership on, had gay rights or about young black men and young white men sitting together on a bed. They had really stood up for something. Anyway, we need to get more of that now. And then the other thing is this whole bit about engaging your suppliers and your clients on the journey. So if you find out your suppliers haven't become a B Corp, hey, we've already written all of these policies. Like, here's our breastfeeding policy. If you don't have one, or this, you can have all of these if you also become a B Corp, you know. And if and you've done your supply chain audit, which is a good thing to do, so you can take your supplier code of conduct and then make them all into questions, and then ask your supply chain. You don't have a renewable energy contract? That's not very difficult, you know. Sign up, get yourself an energy contract, but then help your suppliers, push them, nudge them, and then also help your clients. I mean, how useful, and if you're business to business, that's good for business. So obviously Seacourt, we help our clients become more sustainable and help them in their by printing their materials, of course. But if they've got any B Corp questions, we often have meetings about B Corp. And in fact, I've changed the layout of the offices in B Corp to be what's like an innovation laboratory. So Coca-Cola, I think Carlsberg and Heineken have this concept of an innovation laboratory, which looks into the future, and you get consumer and shopper insights, and you think, what does the future look like? And you take your client into the future. And so we do that with our clients, and we help them. They can ask us any question on sustainability that they like, and we're more than happy to help.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jake. There's so many amazing takeaways there and a lot of food for thought. We've got 10 minutes left now, so we're keen to pass it back over to the audience if there's some Q&A, you know, that they would like to get answered. I did see a question for Jake, which we could get started with, and then Nicole, I'll pass back over to you to see if there's any other questions. Jake, have any other printing companies or competitors adopted your waterless printing innovation?
I think
have you made this public?
Around the world, a couple have, but not that many. I think they maybe see as a big cost. A lot of them are starting to offset their paper. If you buy paper stuff from there, they'll offset the paper, not the entire supply chain impacts, but also that's disingenuous. And this is why I think it's really important to get into the detail and work with your suppliers. Don't use industry standard offsets. So the paper industry standard offset is 660 tons of carbon per ton of paper. It's totally wrong. The UK emissions factor is 919. So their industry figure is wrong by a factor of 40%. So if you're offsetting with your supplier, they're not offsetting enough. And then they're planting trees, which you can't, I know the question about carbon offsetting, you can't claim carbon neutral by planting trees because they obviously, at the end of life, they die and release the carbon back into the atmosphere. But also one thing we've done, which I would suggest to you guys also, is when you do your offsets, try to choose carbon offsets which also have a positive social and economic benefit, especially in the developing world. I hate that term, but ultimately make your offsets work really hard, because then you can try to be, we are net positive for climate change and society. So think about how you can help people and other countries decarbonize themselves, because they need some investment. And during COP26, there was a lot of talk about giving cash and money to help developing countries invest in all of this stuff. Well, we can use our offsets to help do that as companies.
Fantastic. I see that Karen, you've got your hand up. And Joe, whilst Karen's asking a question, I think we can stop sharing the slides now so we can see everyone's lovely faces. Over to you, Karen.
Hi there, thank you. Hi everyone. So a little while back you mentioned carbon analytics. I've just had a quick look at their website as we've been on this call, and I see they've got an API integration, which means other companies can plug in and use that service. So I'm just wondering, is this the official analytics partner for B Corp? Because I have been wondering this very thing this last week, whether you have one.
No, it isn't. It's just a company that I know of and we know of, and they're a great company. So just want to suggest is they're kind of accessible. It's a useful platform that you can just upload your information easily, and it's pretty accessible price point. So yeah, but not an official partner, just a friend.
Oh, okay, but I see they're a B Corp, so it all looks good.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we like to promote B Corps where possible, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll go back into hiding now.
One thing I've found, if nobody's asking any questions, really, really difficult is there's nowhere to ask simple questions to an expert without having to pay like 200 quid. You're like, I'm stuck doing this. Who can help me? I don't want to have a really expensive consultant and all that. I just got a simple question. I'm stuck on my carbon footprint. So I do feel that that's an innovation that can really help SMEs. Just like, where can we turn when we're stuck to get some advice on something? It's just like, even if you like charge £70 an hour and it's like took 10 minutes to answer my question, because actually I did that. I went to find a consultant when I got stuck. I said, look, if I, £70 an hour, help me if I get stuck on these like crazy, what's the carbon footprint of a pencil? And it turns out that's really hard to work out.
I think that's a business opportunity for you there, Jake.
Yeah. Well, we can do, if we do another one of these things, I don't mind taking any question on any sustainability subject, and people can just start firing questions off. Happy to do that. Obviously a bit of a plug for Seacourt or Empathy Sustainability is fine, and we'll do that.
Nicole, do you have any questions in the sign-up form that we want?
Yes, that's what I was just going to mention. A couple of people did submit questions ahead of time, and there were some interesting questions on a similar theme, which was around kind of small professional services companies, maybe with a lower environmental footprint or a small office space. What would be kind of some of the top things that those companies could think about in terms of, doing well in the environment section of the B impact assessment, or just improving their impact in general? So I don't know if there's any kind of top tips, Amy, you would have just for those companies.
Yeah, I think it can be challenging, and it is going to be kind of smaller tips, but absolutely, it's it's thinking about all of the different elements. So it's thinking about your energy providers, it's thinking about measuring, even if it is just in a light touch way, measuring your greenhouse gas emissions, offsetting those if you want to. It's thinking as well about the service that you provide. Is there, oftentimes the most material impact that we can have is through the product or the service that we provide. So if it's a product, could it be designed in a more environmentally friendly way? If it's a service, is there any kind of spin that can be put on it to make the service more environmentally friendly, or build into the advice that you're providing how your customers can be more environmentally friendly? Obviously, that isn't always going to be relevant, but if it is something that you can possibly fit into your product or service, then that's where the kind of more material knock-on impact would be. And then obviously just sourcing properly, sourcing kind of environmentally friendly options, buying from places like partners like Seacourt, or we have other like stationary providers, for example, etc., in the community that you can source from, etc.
Well, can I add two more? I found a lot of companies have not done a good waste audit, and then they don't really know what happens to the waste. And then the people who clean the offices chuck it all back into the same bins, and it doesn't get recycled or segregated properly. So actually go and see what happens to your waste, look in the bin, see what there is, and then work with a waste contractor that can offer you zero waste to landfill, because that's something that's really, really important. The other thing is, increasingly, a lot of people are working from home. And I have one client where their total office carbon footprint is lower than their home working footprint. So, you need to include your home working footprint as well. And then also, as the questions in the BIA also, how are you helping people working from home become more sustainable? So I think about that as well.
Great tips, thank you. Anna, Jess has also dropped a really great resource in the chat, B Corp Climate Collective. There's loads of tools on there that are useful for SMEs to think about in terms of environmental impact. So thanks for that, Jess. I think we have time for one more question, and I see Gillen, I hope I pronounced your name right. I think you've got your hand up, so
yes,
go
you
for
have.
it.
Hi, Jake. Just all really interesting stuff, and it sort of resonates, particularly your point about waste and lazy waste contractors not providing information. But my question is more related to how you deal with suppliers. Sorry, I've got dogs and someone's just arrived. How do you deal with questions related to supply chain information? So questions that ask us about water and how much water the supply chain uses. How do you benchmark that information when you're asked a question about it? Sorry, that wasn't quite my question, but my dogs are being really irritating.
Well, sometimes with your suppliers, you're not going to get easy data, and you can't answer that question. I mean, it happens that the paper manufacturers do measure their water use. It's a huge thing, and therefore the water use factor for the paper supplier we get in our paper profile, which is part of how we assess which paper to use. But then other people like our ink supplier, or our aluminium printing plates, I don't know for them. You can only go so far, but you can tell them that you're interested in getting that data, and then you can ask them, have you done even the same questions that you get asked in the BIA? Do you have low flow taps and things? The thing is, a waterless urinal will save 100,000 liters a year for the men. So think about that as one option. And I have rainwater catchment on my house as a bit of a fun. So the downstairs toilet uses rainwater, and you can run the washing machine on rainwater as well, which then uses less detergents because it's soft water.
Sorry, we've gone a bit crazy here, but my question was really, the questions in the B Corp application ask for things like, have you audited your supply chain? How far do you need to go? We're a supplier. We use a lot of coconut coir for our growing vegetables, and the coconut coir industry is enormous. I mean, it's super global, and we can go. Luckily our supplier is ISO 14001 and SEDEX compliant, but nevertheless, if I'm taking this to the root of the question, I don't know where my coir really comes from. It comes from a supplier that's based in Great Britain who's ISO 14001 compliant. So, for B Corp, how far back in the supply do I need to go to Sri Lanka and
well,
see
there are
the
two ways
coconut
for me.
being
I know the question is for B Corp, but there's two ways to look at that. Is that too many people have relied on their suppliers for those answers, and that is part of the problem. So that a lot of deforestation is happening because of palm oil, and the palm oil suppliers have said, yeah, it's fine, and it isn't. So actually, you do need to, so one, you can only go as far as you can go in your B Corp application, so fair enough. But the moral way to look at that is that there are issues around Koya, and you can look up, generally speaking, what are the issues to be found around Koya. If there are, it's none really to worry about, you're probably fine. But if there are people for whom there is, modern slavery and child labor and all sorts of weird stuff, child labor not always being entirely bad, but ultimately you should try and find out, because ultimately you're relying on somebody else and they don't know, and means that like jeans manufacturing in the Far East is just putting all of the dye and the chemical waste into rivers, and as long as people don't find out, it'll continue to happen.
Gillian, I've just dropped our team's email address in the chat, so if you want to get in touch with us, we can just provide a bit more guidance on kind of how far to go with the supply chain questions. Great.
Apologies for my dog.
No worries. It's always nice to have a dog appear on a Zoom call, even if you can just hear it. Great. I know we've run a couple of minutes over, and I don't want to eat into people's lunch breaks any more than we already have. So we're really grateful for you taking the time to join us today, and hopefully you've learned something useful. So thank you to Jake and Amy, and to all of you for taking part and for the really interesting chat that you've had. And if you have any follow-up questions, our team's email address is in the chat function, so you can reach out to us at any time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with it all.